After 40, your clients lose muscle, coordination, and balance fast. If your program doesn't include these 5 primal patterns, you're leaving them wide open to injury and decline. By age 40, muscle mass starts to decline, joints start to get stiff, and we just don't move like we used to when we were younger. So when we add in these 5 fundamental exercises or types of exercises into our programming, into our 40s, we can reestablish a lot of what was lost from an athleticism and also from a fall and injury prevention perspective, and bulletproof your body against injury, disease, and decline. Hey everyone, Tom Swales here, physiotherapist and advanced movement therapist. Today I'm going to go over 5 fundamental exercises that I not only use on myself, but with every client and every athlete to help reestablish fundamentals of movement, proficiency, as well as energy allocation, but also improve overall athleticism as we age. So the 5 exercises we're going to go over is crawl, climb, carry, isometrics, and hopping. Now we're going to start with crawling because that's where we established our fundamental movements, is from the ground. This is where we start to learn and create that connection with the body, as well as establish a relationship with the ground, so that if we ended up falling and reconnecting with the ground in an unexpected way, because we've established that relationship and awareness with the ground, we know how to mitigate a fall if it happens. And as we know, as we get older, that can become more dangerous for longevity as well as overall health. So the first exercise we're going to go over, as I said, we're going to start with crawling. Why? Because we established and started to learn movement from the ground. So we're just going to end up back there. Now, there are precursors to crawling that we use. There's spine supported positions where dead bugs and our rolling patterns come into play, but we go over that in another video. Today, we want to go over our crawl position. So a very basic is just hands and knees. Okay, so we have kind of this, what we call a baby bear crawl. And it's working on that cross cord. So when we start to learn how to move, we're establishing that cross cord reflex. But what we're also doing is we're teaching the spine in a suspended position, and we're creating anti-shear, anti-rotation control. So we're developing the fascial system through these slings. And by baby lifting up its head, by stimulating the extension reflex at the neck, we're establishing those secondary curves in our spine. But oftentimes when we get injured, or when we start to get pain or dysfunction or stiffness, we don't want to move the spine like it's supposed to. The spine's supposed to bend and twist and do all these things, but if it's not being introduced very often, we lose that ability. And if we lose that ability or that awareness in those positions, the nervous system starts to look at these certain positions as unsafe, and it locks us up and makes us feel stiff. So very simple. We can even just start in a quadruped position, doing our cat camel, or spinal waving is what we call it. And we're looking at, there's a lot of things going on here. There's shoulder stability. We can do proprioception. We can do shoulder joint circles. Our grip reflex is working with an open palm. So I'm not just passively leaning into the wrist. I'm gripping the ground to stabilize the shoulders. As I pick up one hand, I am now working on 2 points of support. And we're working this cross body, this cross cord reflex, which is very important for gait in standing as we walk and as we run. So we can progress this. So we can look left and right. We can teach the neck to dissociate. As it gets a little bit easier, we can come up onto the knees. So now the quads have to work and the hip flexors have to work a little bit harder here. As I get more proficient, I can go forwards and backwards. As I get stronger, I can go longer. So now I can increase the levers as I'm moving through the shoulders and hips, but there's more challenge on the core muscles, but I have to maintain relaxed breathing, a relaxed neck position, and you can play with all kinds of different crawling positions. So we have kind of our bear crawl. We have a leopard crawl. This is going to be more true the kind of your running and sprinting, so it's lengthening out those levers. We've got crab crawl. We're on our back. We're working on shoulder extension. The hamstrings have to work a little bit, especially going forward. Triceps and lats have to work in the short range position here. And then even as we transition into these different positions and different supports. So if I fall, right, we slip backwards. And if I'm strong here from doing a lot of crab crawls, my body knows how to support my body, or my nervous system knows how to support this. So by establishing crawling positions and different ways to move on the ground, we can create that relationship with the ground, but we can restore what was lost by going back to the ground. And yeah, this is not easy. We come up into walking because it is a more energy efficient mode of transportation, but the precursor to walking is crawling. And you can see we can play with all kinds of different hip positions. I can transition, I can experiment, I can create all kinds of different flows. And this is simply from going back down to the ground and establish crawling. So there's lots of ways to do it. You want to get a little bit more fancy, you can get into low lizard crawls, and that really opens up and challenges the core, the shoulders, and the hips into deep positions. But the great thing with crawling is you want to improve cardiovascular fitness, you want to improve posture, you want to improve gait with walking or running, you want to increase core strength, you want to increase shoulder control and stability, work on crawling. So we start with crawling, see what we can do there, because when we're looking at walking and running, if something looks funny up there, you don't know quite why, go back to crawling. Get your clients, try crawling, see, oh, well, that looks funny. So you can see that, oh, well, crawling's not very good. That could be why running and walking looks a little bit off. Reestablish some of these ground movements, go back up, check the walking around. Oh, that looks better now. So it reorganized the nervous system. So getting back on the ground and reestablishing some of these base positions, these fundamental positions from a fundamental ground position can help restore what was lost. And when I was recovering in the hospital, the physios would come and get me and they'd be like, well, where do you want to start? I said, get a mat out. I'll just do some rolling around. Because I knew I needed to reestablish all my center strength. I need to reestablish, how I create force and transmit force. And I knew it comes from the spine. So getting back on the ground from being bedridden, but then eventually get back up into walking, standing, walking with crutches, I knew I needed to establish some level of control here first. So I would spend 30 to 40 minutes on the ground, rolling, dead bugs, get in the quadruped as best as I could. It was really hard and was really painful. But I knew that this was the path or the entry point in which humans learn to move. So I said, well, I might as well start to move like a baby again and correct it from there. If you're enjoying this content so far and you're a clinician or coach who wants to get their clients and athletes out of pain faster with greater results, head over to amtcertified.ca, learn how to incorporate these 5 fundamentals into your rehabilitation and athletic programs. Next, there's climbing. Now, when we're talking about climbing, we're talking about more the precursors to climbing, that which is hanging. So kids, when they come up and they start to try and pull themselves up onto the couch, they're couch surfing, they're using their grip reflex. So there's a reflex called a radiation reflex. When the harder we squeeze, the more tension we create, especially more in the peripheral, the more tension we're going to create in the proximal muscle. So you'll feel this grip reflex kind of pop in. And it's interesting to use because whatever you don't take seriously with the grip, the nervous system won't take seriously at the shoulder. So you can, by taking a sloppy grip, the shoulders kind of pop out of the socket. But if you take a strong grip, those shoulders pack in. So we want to take advantage of that. Now, when we're hanging, there's lots of things that go on. So we can look at hanging as a test for longevity. And anyone says there's lots of stuff out there, 60 seconds to 3 minutes, whatever it is. But the idea is, if we have strong hands, we have strong grip, we have the strength to hold our body weight and potentially pull ourselves up on something. It's just a nice marker for longevity and just overall strength. So strength, we know, is the stronger we are, the greater potential for longevity, but also it's more about fall prevention and energy mitigation if we take a fall or managing our body. Anyway, so there's lots of ways we can look at hanging. So it can be from a simple hang horizontally, just getting that reflex. We can use bands, grip, pack, pull. We can use hanging to decompress. I know a lot of people don't like that word decompression, but we'll just call it traction. So we're creating space in the joints. And for those who have a little bit more tension or compression in their body, just relaxing and letting the shoulders come up as you hang. And you don't have to do full body weight. Put your feet on the floor if it's uncomfortable in the tissues, because this is now becoming a connective tissue stretch. If it's appropriate, then we can allow our bodies to relax. If you have a client that, say, maybe has a little bit too hypermobile of a shoulder, then we want to make sure those shoulders are packed. But you can still take advantage of hanging. Now, in order to do pull-ups or muscle-ups or anything kind of ballistic, hanging is that prerequisite. So we want to be able to hold our body underneath that and pack those shoulders. Once we pack the shoulders, then we can start pulling. But now, if we don't have the strength to pull from a vertical position, we can start doing horizontal. So there's no reason why we can't take advantage of hanging, at least from a shoulder body control perspective in different planes, whether it's from the front, the side, the back. You're still going to get a lot of benefits from hanging, simply from using that grip reflex and improving that grip strength. And once we've established that hanging or that control at our center through reflexes at the hand, then our nervous system will start to say, you know what? Yeah, we do have the control to start moving into different positions, but we need to establish that foundation of hanging strength first. So just doing simple hanging, either from a recovery perspective, as a decompression perspective, as a joint stability perspective, hanging is one of those fundamentals that we need to establish in order to have healthy strength, mobility, and control in the long term. Now, the third type of exercise are carries. Now we're coming up into that spine stacked bipedal position. And this is where, when we use our lifts, such as a deadlift, is important. But deadlift is not really practical. It's functional, but again, it's a precursor to carrying, because as we evolved, we just didn't repeatedly pick something up, put it back down. We picked something up and we moved it to another location. But when we are carrying something, we're not only using the grip reflex that we talked about in the hang and the climb, but we're also using spine control that we talked about in crawling. So now we have to work on dissociation of the hips, make sure that they can move, make sure we're nice and stable in our spine, and we maintain good posture. So there's lots of different variations of crawls, or of carrying, excuse me. But essentially, we can do what's called a suitcase, where we've got a single arm crossbody. And now we have to use anti-rotation, anti-side bend as we're walking. And we can do something to sharpen this up, like walk one foot in front of the other, or walk across a balance beam that will slow us down. And by doing that, we can really kind of evaluate if there's an imbalance on right and left. So if carrying an object on one side of the body is easier than the other, then we have to start asking, well, what's disconnected? Why does one side feel more challenging than the other? Yes, we have a dominant side, but it shouldn't feel that much different when it comes to these gross motor skills. So then we have to start looking at, is it a balance issue? Is it a core stability issue? Whatever it is, we got to figure out, why does that carry feel different? So I like starting with these kind of suitcase unilateral carries first, to kind of evaluate and see if one side feels different, before going into kind of these farmer carries, where typically we have the same weights on the right and the left. Now this time I have a 50 in the left hand, I have a 35 in the other. That's going to cause another different set of challenges in the system. But if I'm doing this and prescribing this, I want to make sure that I do an equal number of steps or distance on the other side to create balance in the system. Okay, so we can start with weights down below, where it's closer to center of gravity. That's typically going to be the easiest. The next, we're going to bring it up a little bit higher. So we do kind of a front rack carry. And now the weight's higher. There's more challenge on my trunk muscles. There's more challenge in the feet and everything else to maintain balance. And of course, if I sharpen this by going onto a balance beam, it's going to make it that much harder. And then now I can bring it up overhead. This is going to be the toughest carry that we've got, because now the weight is higher up. My center of gravity now has to shift up. But I also have to make sure I have sufficient mobility in the shoulder, thoracic spine, hips in order to do this effectively. Because if not, if I don't have sufficient mobility in the right spots, I'm going to compress my lower back, and I'm going to create rotation in areas that don't rotate, especially in that extended position. So reserve that for your clients and athletes who have the prerequisite movements in order to do this. My left shoulder feels different than my right. I don't typically do that a lot. I'm still working on it since I got out of the hospital. But we can always work one side here, one side here. We can create, there's lots of opportunities to get creative and create challenges in the carry position. And with carrying, I have to maintain balance. I have to maintain good posture. I have to maintain my grip. And if I start to lose any of these one thing, the carry starts to get a little bit more challenging. And if I really want to challenge the system, I can go into a bottom-up position. That's what's great about kettlebells, is if my system gets tired, well, guess what happens? Grip lets go. So now the carry becomes a self-limiting exercise, and I don't have to sit there as a coach or therapist to see, are they losing position? Are they losing posture? Nope. Nervous system said, I'm done. Drop the kettlebell. Practice is over. So once we get an understanding of what carries are for, it becomes a tremendous reset, but it's also very practical. This is what I'm going to call functional. So we can look at certain exercises like a deadlift or squat. You know, those are functional, but they're not the end game. The end game is to get up from the ground and move, because as human beings, as bipedals, The end game is to be able to walk and run and move through our environment. And the easiest, most energy effective way to do that is obviously walking and running. But we need to have some of these prerequisites so that when we get into these more advanced positions or these advanced patterns, they don't hurt us. So going back down to the ground, carrying, hanging off stuff will help reset the nervous system and reorganize it so that when we get into the higher performance, the higher speeds, we're less likely to get hurt. Exercise number 4 would be the use of isometrics. Now, I will admit I did not utilize these as much as I should have in my programming, which probably accounted for some of the little aches and pains I incurred. But then when getting out of the hospital, it wasn't just about muscle weakness that I had an issue with. Muscle came on actually pretty quickly. The nervous system started to switch on. It was the connective tissue, the ability to transfer force across the joints effectively using as little energy as possible. And this is where the fascial system comes into play to create tension around the muscles, to create those cylinders so that you can bounce. It creates that spring, that using less effort and less muscle energy to produce force. And this is what took probably the longest to redevelop in my body, but it's coming back. And by utilizing isometrics in every single workout for every single joint, especially around the feet, the ankles, the knees, and the shoulders, I started to see a tremendous change in my body and my abilities very quickly. Now, there's 2 types of isometrics we can incorporate into our programming. We have yielding and we have overcoming. Now, yielding can be anything from where we move into a certain position and we hold it there. So say like a sissy squat, and my quads and my feet and my ankles are all holding that spot or that angle of tension. And we work this from anywhere from 10 seconds if we're working on training and strengthening, or if there's injury, say like a tendonitis or tendinopathy, we want to hold it for 30 seconds in those positions to fatigue out the strong fibers so that we can apply stress to those weaker areas of the tendons and the connective tissue. But since I don't have any injury or tendon issues, we're going to do 10-second yielding exercises. So we can either add loads, we can make it where we isolate. I love this triangle stretch that Ido Portal encourages and Roy Gold. This really helped me a lot with my Achilles issues because what I was finding was I had tendon weakness at the knee, and anytime I would run, I would drop into my Achilles. So it was actually a force distribution problem, but it wasn't the Achilles, it was actually happening at my knee. So by every time I got up, I would do a 30-second hold, and a lot of that pain would slowly start to disappear, and I was able to hold on to that tension better. And then we have overcoming isometrics. This is where we push up against something, say a wall or some kind of heavy object, and we can utilize force and tension from the lower extremity if we're going after the plantar fascia, we're going after the Achilles, the ankles, the hips, whatever it is, and you're trying to move that force and you're working at that specific angle. The neat thing with isometrics is we can find the ranges that are pain-free. So if we're squatting, someone's got knee pain past 90, we can squat them just before that, and we hold them there. But there's a 15-degree overflow of strength that moves into that more painful zone as well as above. So you're actually strengthening 30 degrees of range of motion with an isometric. And then as the tissues and the joints start to be able to manage those forces, we can now move further into those ranges. And we're like, oh, right there, pain, come out of that, hold that for another 10 to 15 seconds, and watch how strength starts to develop through the every single range of motion, every single angle. And we can utilize isometrics not just in painful ranges, but weak ranges as well. So if you see a client kind of getting that stuttering movement, or what we call as cogwheeling, that might be a weak angle or a weak range. So doing an isometric in that range can help develop that strength at that specific angle. And the last type of exercise that I want to talk about is hopping. Not necessarily jumping. I am a big proponent of jumping, but hopping, we're more utilizing the connective tissue. We're using the fascial system to help create propulsion, to create movement, and also get a greater return on muscle power and force development. So with hopping, same as jumping, we want to watch and gauge how much are we applying in our programming throughout the week, because the fascial system does need time to adapt and develop. So we don't want to overstress that, and also we don't want to do too much of the same type of hopping or jumping in our programming. So very simple, you just want to think about jumping up and down and more just pushing the ground away. And just allowing, as soon as that contact is made, it's a bit of a spring. So you're kind of on the toes, you're gripping the ground a bit, you're winding up that plantar fascia. So it starts in the feet. We want to develop the connective tissue starting at the feet, because that's what starts to wind up the kinetic chain from the ground up. We're creating that vibration. It also matters what types of surfaces that you're hopping on. So we can get a different feedback from a wood surface to concrete to grass to a spring-loaded floor. They're all beneficial. But we also want to know that depending on the type of surface that we're jumping on, we can do more hopping on grass because it dampens the vibration, it dampens that force. So it's less force going to connective tissue. If we're jumping on wood or jumping on a hard surface, there is more stress going to connective tissue that needs to be adapted to. Now, there's benefits to both. I like hopping on both. I find when I'm jumping on a very hard surface, my feet are more active. I feel that spring in the feet more energetically, but it does cause more fatigue. So I have to monitor how much and what the volume is of hopping that I'm doing, as well as the intensity. So we can start with a simple 2-foot hop, right? Gripping the ground with the toes. We can split kind of in the sprinter. We can move forwards. We can move backwards. We can go side to side. We can do singles, okay? There's lots of options to do it. And the more proficient the connective tissue, the more spring, the easier it is to move. So this is about increasing efficiency in our movement and relying on muscles less so that we can do more. So it's improving our efficiency with what we've got. And that's by training the connective tissue, training the fascial system to get that elasticity, because as we get older, the elasticity, that spring is what actually we start to lose that quicker. We can continue to get stronger as we get older, but that's a different type of strength. That's muscle strength. That's, the joints, that's the bones. But if we're looking to really create that explosiveness, that speed, that pop, training hopping and a little bit of those explosive movements in the programming is key. And again, when I got out of the hospital, everything felt heavy. Every step I took, it was like clunk, clunk, clunk. I was using a lot of muscle energy. But once I started to develop the fascial system through the isometric training, through hopping and my programming more effectively, all of a sudden things started to feel lighter. Things became less effort. And that's what it's about when we're trying to improve athleticism. We're trying to reduce the effort, reduce the tension in our body or the resistance in our body so that we can use those forces we create in whatever sport that we're doing. We're trying to propel ourselves. We're trying to absorb forces. We're trying to stop. We're trying to change direction. But that's our structure. If our structure is weak or faulty, or the connective tissue can't manage those forces across, we have to develop or we have to lean into muscles, but the muscles will fatigue pretty quickly, and that's where we can get into problems. So adding in your isometrics and your hopping into your programming with your concentric, your eccentrics, all the components of training is essential to improving longevity and athleticism into later ages of life. If you found this video informative and you want to learn more about how to improve movement efficiency and effectiveness, check out the next video coming up. We're going to go over the Turkish get-up, all the components, how to utilize it as a movement restoration, how to use it to assess imbalances right and left side of the body, whether it's mobility, strength, and control, but also creating that pattern in which to get to and from the ground in the most effective and efficient way possible. And this is something I used when I was getting out of the hospital, trying to get to and from the ground. I used a Turkish get-up pattern, just trying to relearn how to get up. I'll see you in the next video.